This is Mike. The Caesar of Concessions is back with another video for you today. And how important this video is for everyone out there who uses ice. How do we stop our ice from melting at a rapid rate? I'm going to share 6, 7, 8 tips that I do to keep my ice from melting at such a rapid rate. This is so important because it's overhead. It's money we're losing as our ice is melting. So how do we stop it, or at least slow it way down? Here in Kansas City, during the summer, we're talking 90 to 105 degrees for 3-4 months straight, right? It's hot, and this is something I've battled for over a decade, right? So how do I do this? Well, I'm going to share these tips with you. The simplest tips are going to be at the beginning of the video, and I put my better tips at the end. So hopefully you guys will watch the video all the way through and get the best tips for you. Number one, you got to keep the coolers in the shade as much as possible, right? It's all about ambient temperature around your coolers and trying to get that ambient temperature around your coolers as low as possible. So the first thing you got to do, you got to keep the coolers in the shade. Now, I know as the day progresses and the sun moves, sometimes that shade goes way out yonder and there's nothing you can do about it. I get it. But while you have the shade, utilize it as much as possible, okay? The next tip, man, this one is so important. Pre-cool your coolers, right? Because look, if you have a cooler and you got in the back of your truck or your trailer or whatever, that cooler is the temperature of the outside, right? Especially if it's sitting out there before you put the ice in there. You got a 100-degree cooler, you're putting cold ice in a 100-degree cooler, instantly we're going to start melting. Pre-cool the cooler. And there's a few ways to do that. Number one, what I've done for years is I have a bunch of water bottles, I freeze them, and I put them in my cooler well before I even put ice in there. That gets my cooler already cold inside, or at least cool, right? So the convection of freezing isn't as rapid. It's not 100 degrees in that cooler anymore. Now we're talking maybe it's 50, 60 degrees inside that cooler. That's a huge difference. That really changes the rate at which our ice will melt. This next one is so important. Using multiple coolers and staging them appropriately. So let's just say you're at a small event, okay? You got 3 coolers. You want to have a main big cooler that you hardly ever open. That's where you keep the majority of your ice. Then you have a secondary cooler, which that cooler is opened a little bit more frequently, and that ice will be used to your serving cooler, right? Which that one is opened up all the time. So you want to wait to put the ice in the serving cooler until you absolutely have to, because it's going to melt a lot, because you're going to be opening and closing it as you are serving your lemonade or your shaved ice, right? So main cooler to keep the bulk of your ice in. A secondary cooler that you will use that cooler to transfer ice to your serving cooler. So as you see, we have steps here in how we are using our coolers. Before I get to the rest of the tips, I appreciate you guys for subbing to the channel. Please watch my videos all the way through. I would truly appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that watches my videos. And I really hope that these help you make money for your family. Next, drain the water. Okay, guys, as much as possible. You don't want that water sitting in the cooler because that's going to melt your ice really quickly. And this is going to lead on to my next tip. We do not want to waste that water that is being melted. That is cold water. So what are we going to do with that water? We're going to drain that water onto beach towels or or big bath towels, right? We're going to drain that water and get our towels completely soaked. And then what do you think we're going to do with those towels? We're going to put those towels on top of our coolers. So that drops the ambient air temperature around the coolers. I mean, we're talking 30, 40 degrees of a difference between cold, wet towels that are on top of the coolers. So if it's 100 degrees out, you put those cold, wet towels on top of the coolers, man, that really drops that air temperature around the coolers, to like 70, 60 degrees right there around your coolers. And that tip alone, I mean, if you didn't do anything else and you just used cold, wet towels, that will help immensely. But if you use the rest of these tips I'm going to share with you and the ones I've shared with you earlier, and you combine all of them, yeah, your ice will melt at such a slow rate and save you a lot of money. So the cold wet towels is just I've used that forever, and I use it today. And if I can't use any other tips for whatever reason, the cold wet towels are my number one to help me with that. Dry ice. If you can get dry ice, that is so important. And there's a couple ways to utilize this dry ice to save you money. You put the dry ice in there before you put your ice in there. Like I would use the frozen water bottles, like I mentioned earlier. That's if you can't get to the dry ice. But if you can get to dry ice, you have a little money and you want to spend that on the dry ice, put that in your coolers before you put your ice in, okay? And then keep the bulk of your dry ice in your main storage cooler. Then put a little bit in your second cooler, the one that you put in your serving cooler. Don't put the dry ice into your main serving cooler. There's no point. You're going to be opening and closing that cooler so much it's going to melt. It doesn't matter. So the dry ice is huge, but if you don't want to spend the money on that, I get it. I totally understand. But if you do, I think it'll pay for itself by keeping the bulk of your ice really, really cold. Now this one I've used quite a bit, and I don't know how many other people use this tip. If you have access to bubble wrap, man, that is a great insulator. So you're using all these other tips I shared with you. Okay, so you're going to put you're going to have your main serving or your main storage cooler rather. You're going to have either your frozen water bottles in there along with your big bags of ice or your dry ice. Then on top of that, you're going to put your bubble wrap. Then you're going to close it. Then you're going to put your cold, wet towels on top of it, and you're going to have it in the shade. Okay. And also put the bubble wrap in your secondary cooler. And you can, I wouldn't use it in my serving cooler because I don't know if that's sanitary or whatever. I wouldn't mess with it there because your serving cooler is what it is, right? It's the one that's going to melt the quickest. There's not a lot you can do to save that one. However, if you put bubble wrap on top of your ice in your secondary cooler and your main storage cooler, along with all these other tips that I've shared with you, your ice will melt at such a slow rate, you will save a lot of money. This is Mike, the Caesar of concessions, out.